I think the one thing that everyone wants and needs to know right now is this. Did Red Bull cheat or not? We need to know! Well, I mean, in a way, the truth probably doesn't matter anymore. The internet's already made up its mind about whether or not they cheated. But I think the reality is that you can sum up the ideas that Pierre Vacher has regarding the RB20 to what you can fit on this piece of paper, which is, yeah, not a whole lot. They are collectively shrugging. In an interview with Autosport, Red Bull's lead designer has admitted that they have reached the limit, probably, of what they can do with the RB20. And even though it has improved over last year's car, and something might be found in the fullness of time, the gains are not coming thick and fast these days. Now, even though I appreciate the honesty of Pierre Vacher and say that they are actually struggling and they are reaching the peak of what they can do with this iteration of Formula 1 car, it's not exactly instilling the confidence that you expect from Red Bull. There's been something off with Red Bull the entire year. They've just not acted like themselves. Forever Rebel, it's almost become ironic in how unrebellious they've been. Come on, where's the chest-thumping, cutthroat manner? Red Bull, be strong! It's just not there. And Vacher is correct that the upgrade packages that they brought this year have mostly either not worked or they've worked in the subpar level. I think the Japanese Grand Prix upgrade was their best one, and it did provide them a good uptick in performance. But other than that, it's all been a little bit lackluster. And I think it all came to a head in Hungary when they brought their high grip, high downforce configuration, and it did not help Max at all. Now, this doesn't mean that Red Bull have failed entirely, but they didn't meet their expectations from the beginning of the year, particularly when the teams around them are clawing back the deficit to them since the latter end of 2022. Now, I bet you're wondering what I think about the whole cheating fiasco that Red Bull has been accused of. You see, I've been very reluctant to talk about it. I've been really quiet on the matter because, as far as I'm concerned, it's just part and parcel of what Formula 1 is. It's this dangerous tango between designers and regulators. The designers come up with something cool, and then the rule makers suddenly go, wait, you can't do that! Bam! So when people were looking for a cause as to why Red Bull fell off, and then there was this rule change in the FIA guidelines regarding asymmetric braking, people then assumed, myself included initially, that, oh, Red Bull must have broken the rules! They cheated! Max Verstappen has 0 titles! Ah! Here's where I think the FIA got their own doubt, because they've now come out and said, well, no, this isn't something that we found on one car, that the teams came to us about this. The new rule changes in 2026 are coming up, and all the teams just wanted to make sure with the governing body what they thought about these systems before they decided to sink in millions of dollars to potentially make their own solution, and that ultimately being banned again. It's kind of like with the third brake thing that McLaren had back in the late 90s, only more subtle. No pesky photographers grossing on them. Now, Dr. Obbs on Twitter put out a very comprehensive piece on the matter, and I'll leave a link to it in the pinned comment, ultimately concluding that, indeed, Vacher is correct. Red Bull simply have brought upgrades which haven't cut the mustard in responding to the competition. And I think that 2025 won't be that much better, unless they can find this absolute magical solution that can gain them half a second between this year and next year. I think that next year's going to be the same, and then there's 2026 to consider. Do Red Bull just give up on next year, hope that maybe Max can produce some really special laps in qualifying to be able to keep everybody behind them, or do they sink in more time for next year and then compromise 2026? There's a real balancing act right now. It's going to be interesting. And of course, we also have to listen to what's going on with the other competition, like Ferrari responding to all of their maladies and missteps, McLaren, when are they going to bring in their next package, and Mercedes' consistent flow. It's all mad. And like I just said, we're all going to be having a look at Max Verstappen and see whether or not he can actually do the business on Saturday to make his life on Sunday much better. You see what I did there? I'm bringing Zandvoort back in, so that means what I just said was relevant. Yeah, you go. Connections, continuity, stability. No, stability and continuity. That's what Christian Horner likes. What I do find a little bit curious is Vacher's comments regarding their disappointment in the car's performance in high-speed corners, which is usually a staple of any Red Bull car. But when you look at what Adrian Newey said regarding the ride height rule change in 2022, the high-speed issue was something that he managed to assist in resolving for the following year, meaning that he and his posse had pretty much solved it. Now, this is where I think Adrian Newey's absence is going to bite, and you might be thinking I'm glazing all over Adrian, but we have to remember that even though Vacher has been rubbishing the claims that Newey was really important, just 2 years ago, Pierre called him irreplaceable. And I believe that's the case in the fact that he was just there as that overseer, Just watching how things go and then can just go, maybe you shouldn't do that, maybe you should go down this path. Just that clarity. And now he's not there. He's now simply working on the RB17 hypercar for Red Bull Applied Technologies. Yeah, they don't have that clarification, that overseer. And that might lead to missteps, which will then just grow and grow and grow over time. And we're now starting to see it. After the Japanese Grand Prix upgrade, which I believe was the last one that Adrian Newey oversaw and had the green light on, we've now seen Red Bull just underperform when it comes to boosting the car's performance. Otherwise, before then, they were actually really good, at least getting a couple of tenths. And I'm sorry, Pierre and Red Bull, I have absolutely no sympathy for you right now regarding the idea about your wind tunnel. They're talking about, oh, we're suffering from a correlation error because we have an old wind tunnel. Well, you could have easily rectified that when times were good. I mean, they are building a new wind tunnel now. They've only just started constructing it, but Christian Horner says it won't be fully operational until 2027. And by then, Max Verstappen might not even be there. He might not even be in F1. I'm sorry, Red Bull, you rested on your laurels a little bit too hard in that regard. In any case, what this means for Zandvoort specifically is that Max is going to have to pull out yet another special drive like he did in Spa. That pole time lap was remarkable given that Red Bull typically specs itself for the race rather than quali. But I think that going for the rest of the season, Max Verstappen is really going to have to set up his car more towards qualifying than he has done in recent times, because it's very clear that right now, everyone else is scrabbling around to see who's going to be the second best driver or taking the crown from Max. So they're all going to be going like, I want to go after Max. No, I want to go after Max. No, I want to go after Max. And then Max is just like, lol, okay. But whatever happens at the Zandvoort track, what's going on around in the grandstands is going to be more important than ever. The Orange Army does need to represent. And even though the Dutch Grand Prix organisers are claiming it's a sold-out event, that might be a little bit incorrect. There might be shenanigans afoot when it comes to ticket numbers. According to GP Blog's piece on that matter, the Dutch organisers claim that the event sold out and all's well, but then a third-party buyer has come out and said that's not true. And this isn't a random outfit, by the way, that you've never really heard of. This is Platinum Group. They work with Formula One management specifically regarding the management of tickets. They bought 35,000 of them at a cost of 3.8 million euros, and now they want their money back for the fact that the Dutch Grand Prix organisers allegedly have gone against their exclusivity deal. As a result, Platinum Group have gone to the Dutch courts in The Hague to demand the cash back, and they've given the Dutch lot back 8,000 tickets that they were unable to sell. But since they were already purchased for resale, they are technically sold out. Semantics, eh? It is a little bit cheeky given what happened at Silverstone, because people will want to get discount tickets, they won't make a profit out of it, the Dutch GP organisers, and it's just all a bit of a mess really about one track clapping back at another track. I never knew circuits could produce drama. What? But regardless, it's still a really bad look. But it will be curious to see whether or not the Dutch supporters turn out for their boy, and if Max fails to perform or worse, retires, I might not be surprised to maybe see them walk out early. Much like how I could imagine that Lewis's fans would have left Silverstone early had that happened to him. And why I think it's really important for Max to get on pole or be on the front row to be able to challenge for the lead is that Zandvoort is an old school track in terms of thickness. Most of the time, it's twisty, windy, and narrow. The only place that you can really overtake easily is the straight. Anywhere else, you're hoping for the person ahead of you to make a mistake, because it's just going to get even harder to try and think of overtaking, because the whole point about these new rules was to encourage overtaking and reduce drag, and now it's actually come back with a vengeance. It's almost even worse now around this kind of track where the cars are really big. It's just, I think this is the real alternative to Monaco. People think that it's difficult to overtake at the Hungaroring. I think it's worse at Zandvoort. And that might be reflected with the fact that right now, as of this recording, next year's Dutch Grand Prix, 2025, will be their last one. There were rumours talking about them alternating with the Belgian Grand Prix or something like that, but I really don't see it happening. In terms of characteristics, they are nothing like each other. One's a small, twisty, windy place, one's massive, and I don't know. I think it might be the Max Verstappen factor, I don't know, but either way, I just don't think the long-term future of the Dutch Grand Prix is exactly assured. And if Max Verstappen chooses to retire and go somewhere else, yeah, it's off the calendar. But anyway, as to who can respond to the slowing balls most confidently, it's a bit of a toss-up. Even though it was supposed that Ferrari might have had upgrades coming for this race, it's not entirely certain yet. And McLaren are still looking impressive despite having no major tweaks since Austria, but they surely must be running out of steam by now, because Mercedes are looking likely to be the ones that will take up the challenge for the moment. Now, okay, I can imagine that a lot of you out there are now groaning collectively and going, oh great, here comes the British bias, oh stop! Would it help you that I would ideally prefer that Oscar Piastri won the Dutch Grand Prix by a bajillion seconds? There you go. There's my grounding, my impartiality, British bias. Yes, I'm British, but I want an Australian to win. So if you are going to come after me regarding bias, it's not British bias, it's Commonwealth bias. Thank you, mate. But we need to look how aggressive Mercedes has been in recent times. And even though changing concept as often as they have, like changing of the seasons, was met with concern at the start of the year, the W15 ceiling is a lot higher than the RB20s simply for the fact that it's brand new and it's working. Newey's concept of evolution rather than revolution has resulted in the team reaching their endpoint much sooner, and them desperately needing one of those things that you see in trains to break glass to get past their glass ceiling. Ferrari and McLaren have a little bit more time before that happens to them, since they started their current concepts a little bit later than Red Bulls. But with Mercedes, no. It's all brand new, and it's taken a long time to get over the initial weaknesses, and there are still some weaknesses to overcome. But according to the people over at Mercedes and the drivers, the work window that the car has is a lot bigger than it was at the beginning of the year. So that means it makes it a little bit more versatile, Lewis can work with it more, George can work with it more. It just seems like it's something that's working, and they're bringing parts regularly, piecemeal. And most importantly, the team has now fully adapted to an era where Formula One has a cost cap. Because back in the day where there was limitless spend, they could just plow in as much cash and as much time as they wanted to bring a part after one race. If they had a bad race, they'd make an upgrade, and then by the following race, they'd be okay again. Now they've actually managed to make that work with less money. And on top of that, both of its drivers have a point to prove. And even though Oscar and Lando have points to prove themselves, and future races will see McLaren respond in a big way most likely, since they're practically running the same car since Miami, save for the front wing, both Hamilton and Russell though, they're fired up to stake a claim for more wins in the back end of 2024. I'll go into more detail in the main prediction sections for George and Lewis, but the point is though, is that Mercedes right now as a collective, they are completely and utterly relieved that the worst of the season is well and truly behind them. Everything else now is a bonus. They've now secured 3 wins this season, and they probably are going to be getting a few more. And as McLaren have actually squandered most of their time of being the fastest car because they've only got 2 wins to their name, I wouldn't be surprised that Mercedes might be able to get closer to 3rd place in the Constructors, maybe leapfrog Ferrari, and if Red Bull's lot gets even worse and Checo is unable to deliver and Max has to do what he can but can't really get anything other than maybe 2nds and 3rds, then maybe 2nd place in the Constructors for Mercedes might be the watchword. Red Bull might be as low as 3rd. Just imagine that. And even though the team has changed a lot since 2021, with people coming and going, Mercedes as a whole still has the tools and experience from other members of its crew to understand how to fight at the front, which is something McLaren lacks. And it will be very interesting to see how it plays out. And let's not forget, the Dutch GP of 2022 was one of their best races of that year, in a year of major reality checks. And let's not forget, it was one of George's best races of that season as well. He made a last-minute pit stop and a tyre change that worked out brilliantly. And even though Lewis Hamilton was relegated to 4th place because he chose to stay out during the safety car and he was just completely swamped by Verstappen almost immediately after the restart, this was one of their best races, Mercedes. And if it remains dry on Sunday, which is to be expected, maybe some rain on Friday, I wouldn't be surprised that we might see Mercedes going really well around this circuit. I mean, 2023, that was a completely nutter crapshoot. And that spot could really make waves because the Belgian Grand Prix upgrade will be brought back now they fully understand it, as well as maybe some further tweaks. So this Mercedes car might be quite a bit better than the Spa one, and that Spa one was really good. But regardless, the turnaround of Mercedes is something that should be congratulated by all the people behind the scenes at Brackley that managed to make it happen. Much like how we congratulate McLaren's turnaround in 2023, and then Red Bull's turnaround in 2020 and 2021. Now remember, we fans wanted a response to Mercedes' domination. Just be careful what you wish for. Now, in regards to the rest of the pack, given that the top 4 teams are seriously romping away with their upgrades as well as general momentum, the question really is, who can fight for 9th and 10th, really, like it was at the beginning of the year? Now, given the nature of the circuit though, and where we are in the season, where wear and tear can really come into play, we might see some mechanical retirements, or due to the fact that it's really narrow, we might see some crashes between a fair few people. Maybe 8th or 7th might come into the offing for the bottom 5 teams. But in terms of the hierarchy, I think we're back to where we started. Aston Martin seems to have got a handle on things after their disastrous upgrade in Imola, but V-Carb's had their own fair share of troubles as well. Haas is relatively stalled, but is competent. And as for Alpine, I really don't see them scoring easily here, because even though David Sanchez, their new aerodynamic arm or whoever he is today, has said that performance might be gained in 2025 and that might slip into this year as well, and Oliver Oakes is a brand new breath of fresh air as a team principal, we might see some cautious optimism from the team, but it might not translate into actual points for a good few races yet. But either way, I think Alpine will be a little bit more confident this time out. We might see that actually rubbing off quite positively, actually. But yeah, I do think that maybe Fernando and Lance might cap off the remaining points-paying positions for the time being. And oh yeah, Zhou Guanyu probably might be 20th again. But anyway, let's get on to the predictions. So going off of my earlier comments, the person who I think will win this year's Dutch Grand Prix is not Lewis Hamilton, but it will be the return, nay, revenge of George Russell. I think it's quite clear that George is both hurting from what happened in Spa and determined from what happened in Spa. The Belgian Grand Prix is one of the hardest tracks on the calendar, and George did what he did, that one-stop strategy, holding off Lewis Hamilton, who was just desperate to overtake him. Remember, by the way, they were allowed to race, so there was no team orders at play here for Lewis to remain in position. George managed to do something utterly remarkable. It wasn't his fault that the team had got things wrong with terms of their calculations and weight issues, as well as procedures. They really should have told George if it was going to become a problem. Now, no, the one-stop strategy wasn't workable, but no, what happened, but George should be commended regardless. But I just feel like he has a point to prove. He was challenging for the win at one of the hardest tracks here, and this was a track where he did really well with a pit stop call. He seems to really know how to interpret the conditions of the Zandvoort circuit, which does make me think that he might be the one to come out on top and really show Lewis that, hey, you might be good too, but I'm here as well. Because even though we might have seen that in 2022 and 2023, where they've been squabbling with one another, it wasn't regarding wins. So either this can turn out to be a really good wholesome battle for who can be ultimately the best Mercedes driver in the Russell-Hamilton arc, or it could get really ugly really fast. I want to see Lewis answer the call and get that 106th win out of a sheer battle. That would be really interesting to see, because I think Hamilton will be definitely second, and I think it's just down for similar facts. He'll be hurting from the fact that he couldn't get past George, and he'll be determined to show everybody that he can win legitimately on the road instead of being gifted a win via a disqualification. But either way, Hamilton is also really stoked for the fact that he can still win, and he still figures for wins. I don't think he would like to win a race through a technicality or a disqualification, and I feel like he would want to just emulate what he did in Silverstone with a masterclass, and we might see something really good here. He's back in the game, and I think he knows that too. And I think in the back end of this year, like I mentioned in my predictions video from yesterday, we will see Lewis win at least 2 more races in the back end of this season. And right now, the Mercedes car is coming to him, and he might like some more advantage in qualifying. He does say qualifying is an issue with the car and overall specification of the Formula 1 machine that he doesn't really like. He's managed to make it good somewhat, and in the race, he's absolutely electric. But if he can just be better in qualifying, it'll make things a lot easier. We'll see more confidence from him. But right now, Mercedes are on a high. And if they're just going to keep bringing upgrades and really show the Mercedes of old in some way, then yeah, you cannot discount them. Mercedes are really looking good for at least 3rd place again, because the team is as fired up as their drivers. And okay, Max Verstappen is also fired up as well. But the Red Bull team is looking like they're a little bit lost at the moment. It could easily change. They could easily rectify it because, hey, they've been at the top. What's stopping them? They could easily find something that brings them back to the top paying position. Whereas right now, I'm predicting that Max at his home circuit will be 3rd. I can't give him any lower position because this is a home circuit. It will help him a lot. But I do think he will be in pole position. But Mercedes' cars, ooh, that's a really tricky thing to hold back. But again, like I mentioned earlier in the video, if Max can get past and everyone else is squabbling, say George and Lewis, about who's going to go after Max, then Max might be able to make an advantage of it, get a big enough gap, be able to dictate the pace of the race, and maybe win through the fact that, you know, he's consistent and his teammate isn't bothering him. Well, it's certainly not bothering him at the moment. But I do feel like third place, that's a sensible prediction given how much Mercedes has progressed and Red Bull's relatively remained stagnant almost. But yes, I do feel like Max is going to be on it. We will see some very special racing from him in the next few months. It's going to be good. It's going to be historic almost. And this is when Max is on the back foot. He is up against it, but right now, I think he's also fired up and interested in racing again. This is when it's going to get good, folks. Now, in terms of who's going to be in fourth, this was tough for me. And in the end, I will have to say that in fourth place, it will be Oscar Piastri over Lando Norris. And here's why. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the McLaren have actually managed to figure some things out over the summer break when they can, and their momentum is still just as good as it was before the summer. But I do feel like that them not really doing much in terms of upgrades is going to start to show that they are losing a bit of steam. And Andrea Stella has promised more upgrades are coming, and that they've actually managed to make the good for the fact that they actually have plenty of ATR time left over since they've not really had to develop anything major. I just feel like they really need to bring something in the next couple of races to remain relevant and actually remain in contention for more race wins. But the momentum of Mercedes just cannot be ignored. But between Oscar and Lando, the momentum, the pendulum of the online public opinion has swayed drastically towards Oscar. It's absolutely crazy how popular he's become in the space of a month. But the fact that he's been on it, he's been winning. Okay, I don't want to gush anymore. But the point is, though, is that he's come out of the summer break motivated, fired up, now having recovered from the injury to his rib, to want to make a point. In fact, he's actually talked about maybe going after the championship this year himself. I mean, okay, let's not get crazy, Oscar. Next year, maybe. This year, though, just keep on learning. But I feel like he has got the confidence to take it to his teammate and help them, McLaren, to get to the top place in the Constructors. I feel like he's fired up, he's motivated, he's confident, it's looking good for him. But again, it will be really close to Lando, who I do peg for 5th place. Because conversely, the momentum has gone away from Lando. There's been a lot more doubt surrounding his way. But don't get me wrong, Lando is still a really incredible and competent driver. We also have to remember that at Spa, he was reeling from the fact that his Belgian grandmother passed away, so that's going to knock anybody for 6. It would certainly knock me for 6 if a relative passed and I was working on something. I wouldn't be at my best. But either way, there's just been this attitude in the media, as well as just the online circles, that things are just not looking good for him, that maybe his way of dealing with things is just simply not working. There have been calls for him to change, but Lando isn't going to change because it works for him, and fair enough, it works for him, then so be it. We can't do a thing about it. Just going past all of that, we need to look at Zandvoort itself. You might be arguing, well, wait a minute, Oscar Piastri was 9th place last year. How do you think he'll do better than Lando this year? Well, that was down to the fact that Oscar did lose a lot of time in terms of qualifying because he had that crash in practice, which resulted in Daniel Ricciardo's injury, so that didn't help. And also, Lando Norris was on the front row last year, and then all the rain stuff happened, and he was relegated to 7th. And 7th has actually been his best result so far in the 3 times he's actually been to Zandvoort. And I know you're probably going to be saying, well, the 2 screwed him over with the pit stops and stuff. Yeah, that wasn't a good look from McLaren. But I reckon that Lando, I just don't think this is one of his best tracks. He could prove me wrong. And even now, 5th place, this would be his best result by a couple of positions. But I do feel like the race as to who is going to be the most favoured and lead McLaren driver, it's going to be a dicey one. It's not as clear-cut as it was at the beginning of this year, or heck, even around the time of the Monaco Grand Prix. It's just starting to look a little bit precarious. Lando is not the de facto number 1 absolute no questions asked. People are now starting to ask that question. And Lando should be ready, and I hope he's ready. I want him to be ready. I want both McLaren drivers to be as on it as the Mercedes drivers. That is going to be good. And my predictions don't stop there. I've got 11 spicy predictions for the rest of the year as a whole in this video here that you can go and watch right now. I shall see you there.